Welcome to the Lost and Found podcast. I'm your host, Amanda. Join me each week as I rediscover my life's meaning, my passions, and my place in this world after leaving behind the only dream I've ever known. If you are dealing with self-loss, identity changes, career transitions, or you are still trying to figure out your life's purpose, then you're not alone. Join me. Wanderers are always welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What Now, a podcast of Lost and Found. This is your host, and I am so sorry that the last couple of weeks have just been kind of crazy. If you haven't been following me on social media, I ended up breaking my fibula. I have been watching my dog Dirks and my parents' dog Dolly. They are brother and sister, and so they've been with me for the last 3 weeks. And at the time of this recording, I'm okay, but the last couple of weeks leading up to a few of the episodes, I had to postpone because I was taking care of them and slipped in the backyard and broke my leg. And so all of my editing and process for how I record and time I spend on the computer promoting the show and doing all these various things has just changed. I've not been able to do it because I've been dealing with a lot, and I ended up interviewing this next guest, Sheila Buswell, and she's amazing. She's an author and an entrepreneur, inventor, innovator, an engineer, trained in the Army and got her master's in engineering and started her own biomedical engineering company. And she has created the physical therapy and rehabilitation machine called the UPMO, or upward mobility for full name, which enables people with injuries or functional issues to carry on throughout the day, doing day-to-day things like going to the restroom, cooking, standing, bending over, and it uses AI to power and learn how that person moves, and based on how tall they are, how old they are, how much they weigh, and their gender and things like that. So it's absolutely fascinating. So she's going to share her story of growing up and her interest in science and how that, moved throughout her career changes, and all of her stories about innovation and problem solving and trying to break into the healthcare industry as an entrepreneur, her military experience and how that influenced the decisions that she made as a founder and as a daughter, and her decision to eventually write a book all about imposter syndrome, because she was dealing with imposter syndrome when she was trying to start her business and ended up writing a book to help others feel less alone in the world. And so I think you'll find her discussions fun and different. But this episode's really just all about how to build confidence, find your community, and improve just self-trust, no matter what journey you might be on, and how to carry those feelings of grief and resilience with you and pursue the life that you've been dreaming of all along, and not letting the self-doubt prevent you from moving forward. So I hope you enjoy our chat. I'll be honest, my mind has been everywhere. So this outline is not normal for most of our shows. Usually I introduce the guests and then we move forward with the interview. But when Sheila logged on, we hit it off. And so we hit the ground running and just started talking. So this is the full episode and I hope you enjoy it. Please reach out if you have any questions or comments about anything that we talk about on this episode. Always remember to like, subscribe, share the show with your friend, anybody that might be struggling with their identity and their career changes. If they're navigating a particular existential crisis, they're trying to figure out their purpose in this world, if they're having issues with self-esteem or self-worth, this is a show that's meant to bridge the gap between who you are now to who you want to become. And by sharing these vulnerable, raw, authentic stories with one another, I feel like we can learn from each other and improve your lives, right? One step at a time, one story at a time. And without further ado, please enjoy Sheila Buswell. And I am supposed to be moving closer to my parents, and then I ended up breaking my leg, and now the move is kind of up in the air. But the point is to move home so that way I can save some more money, buy better technology, get a better camera and microphone. I kind of feel like I've been doing this. Like all the famous inventors always start out of their garage or on the floor in their bedroom. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And now I've started to prove to myself, which we can maybe even talk about this for the show. I feel like I can actually say now I am a podcaster. A lot of times when people ask me, well, what do you do? Or what do you do for fun? And I didn't realize until maybe a couple months ago, I was still not telling people about it. Not that I wasn't proud of the show, but my identity of being a creator, I'm just getting used to it, right? And then my dad would always interrupt me and be like, well, she's got this podcast and she does this thing and she talks about this and all that kind of stuff. And people go, why didn't you say that? Why didn't you lead with this thing? And it's just shown me that, okay, if this is for real, I have to invest in myself. I have to take a risk and try this for real. And maybe it'll take a while to make any money and it'll take a while to grow it into whatever I believe it could possibly be. But sometimes you just actually need to do that. So that was the point of the move and trying to invest in myself. No, I went to college at the University of Mississippi and I did my undergrad in psychology and intelligence and security studies. And then from there, I accepted a contract job with FEMA. And while I was working for FEMA, I was waiting on my application with the FBI. And so I worked there for 3 years as a counterintelligence contractor. And then after that, I had a job offer from the White House right after the first Trump administration, but they ended up getting rid of the division I would have worked for. So I made it all the way through and I had the offer letter signed and everything. But then 3 weeks after I had that, I was supposed to start, they just dismantled it and fired the director that was in charge of it. So I didn't have a job. So then I switched and I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency for about 6 months. And then a new contract came up with FEMA. So I went back to work for my previous boss. And I was a full-time federal employee there for a year. And then I went to the Bureau again for 3 years. And then COVID hits and everything goes sideways for everyone in lots of industries. But the Bureau in particular was a really interesting place to be at that time because you had to protect your own people and make sure everybody that was sick was taken care of, but you still had to conduct all these investigations. And it just got really complicated. And my family got sick and had a lot of personal issues going on. And like professionally, they made it really hard for me to handle both. And so eventually I just had to come to a head and make the decision of like, all right, what am I going to do? Do I stay here but lose my family? Or do I lose this career that maybe doesn't really care about me because I'm another number, right? They've got 37,000 employees. What's one analyst?
Well, and the truth is I have my best friend is a special agent for the FBI. And she's like, people lose their jobs here on a whim. And it's, people who are just doing their job. They're doing what they're supposed to do. So there's no security.
I had a very good career lined up. I had, right before I left, I had joined a new criminal squad for crimes against children and human trafficking that had like a pretty clear path that I could go up the ladder and you could see the career changes. Like it was a very step by step thing. But I kept thinking to myself, if you do this, right? Like you accept all the things that they're offering you, all the benefits that you'll get after the 20-25 year stint. But what do you have waiting for you on the other side? You're not married, you don't have kids, and I'm still debating that in my head, whether or not I want those things. But like you're almost 30 at this point. You don't have any of these other things and all you do is work. You gave up dancing. You don't travel anymore with your other friends because you can't because of your background checks and everything. What kind of life is that going to be? Like, yes, you will be well endowed with experience. You could get hired by Uber or a major security company and you can go do security at Disney or the NFL or something major like that. Your skills will be applicable, but will you be happy? And I kept trying to ask myself these kinds of things to be serious. Don't just give up on a career that's really nice. The government has a lot of good benefits. As you know, being from the military background, you've got a lot of great things if you were to keep with it. But at the end of the day, what was that going to be?
Yeah. And what does that look like?
And so for me, the answer was if we were to have another pandemic, because we will, because humans don't wash their hands, when this happens again, do you want to be here or do you want to be by your family or somewhere else where you can be flexible? And I chose flexibility. So it it was a really, really hard thing for me to let go of. And I grieved that, and I still do. I think I've gotten a lot better, but I used to have that idea, and I would love to bring somebody on to talk about grief for the show. But I used to think you grieve somebody that dies, right? Or you grieve a relationship that ended, like a breakup, something that feels a whole lot more tangible than changing careers. I didn't realize that I had such deep rooted identity stuff with that. And there's still moments in my life where somebody will say something, or they'll ask a specific question, or it'll just hit me. And I'm kind of like, damn, I thought I was over that. I thought I was okay. I thought I was doing so much better. I've realized that grief is never something that goes away. Grief is somebody they walk beside you every day. They're holding your hand throughout your entire life. It's just how you choose to manage that relationship that helps like enable you to move forward and do all kinds of different things. But that's really why I started the show, is because I had such a heavy response to it, and I didn't understand why. I didn't identify it as grief. And in that moment, I was frustrated and disappointed and so sad and feeling lost, and hence needing to find people that are found to see if they would have any answers. And so that's why I love getting to talk to people like you, because you have interesting stories, and you've possibly been through something similar, with the regimented kind of lifestyle from the military, but now you're an engineer. And just the irony that you're creating all of these things that are going to be helpful for people that need rehab. And I'm someone that broke her foot, that grew up around the military anyway, because the marketing agency I work for is our family business, and it's rooted in recruitment and retention programs for the Army National Guard and the Navy. I've met people from all over the branches, and so I just figured, you and I might have a lot in common to talk about.
I honestly, so your identity crisis, honestly, I've had this. It's the same thing. But my military experience was never, it was always just a stepping stone. My North Star was far away from that. But I've had my identity tied to my profession and been laid off a job or fired from a job. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, you're like, hold on, what the hell? I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the part, is the skills you have are yours forever. If you're not using them, or you use them in some other way, that's great. But it's hard. It's a brave thing to do, to just start over. So good for you.
It's the scariest thing too. I guess I talked about this with the episode that just came out this week was with a guest named Lori Pappas, and we talked about how scary it is to let go of that previous identity. Like you don't realize the stories you were telling yourself while you were living in that world, or while you were identifying in that way. And when you let go of those previous beliefs, or those previous held opinions about yourself, or the perceptions you had of how to operate, it's very scary to it almost feels like you're being de-brainwashed. Even though I wasn't part of a cult, I wasn't being abused,
it's just the way your brain works. Like, how can you use this for that?
Right. The structure of what I used to think about, like I spent 6 years in 6 years or more in school doing this thing, and then I went to work for 10 years doing this thing, and now I'm not doing that thing anymore. It's kind of like, well, then what am I good for? What am I useful with? And so I know that's a terrible way to think about yourself, because you are more than just a job, but it's a funny way that your brain tricks you into thinking certain things, and like learning how to get out of that mindset and change all that.
It's not just a job, though. I've seen people do it with being parents. They're, they caregivers for their kids, and then they have an identity crisis when their kids leave home, because for so long they've identified as that. And people define themselves like they wear their disease like a name tag, or they introduce themselves with it, and they become that. And I cannot help but think that that's so unhealthy, but what is your reality, and it's how you're coping. But people identify themselves with all sorts of things.
Right. Humans are so multifaceted, right? And you can't always be more than just one thing. Well, let's talk a little bit about you too, because you're an author, you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur, an inventor, and a veteran. You've had all these different iterations of your life. But I'm curious, maybe we could dive in, reverse all the way back to the beginning a little bit. I was listening to some other podcast interviews you had, and you talked a lot about how it shaped you, and like you had a really good relationship with your grandmother, and like she kind of taught you so many things when you were little that you didn't realize were, oh, that's what she was trying to say, like once you became an adult. And so I would love to hear a little bit about what shaped Sheila into Sheila, and what kind of influenced your affinity for your business now and your biomedical stuff and engineering.
Talking about reinvention, my grandma, I know this a lot about her, because she lived with us from when I was born till I was 14, right? But like, her husband died at a relatively young age. She paused life to take care of him. And she had 2 sons. And when my dad was deployed to Vietnam, my grandma came from New York. Like, she was in the city to out desert Utah, outstate in the desert, West Desert of Utah. Yeah, it was very different. And I remember she was still my grandma, but I learned so much about her and the strength that it took. And sometimes, you have to redefine yourself because of the situation. We were talking before about parents who identify as parents only, and their kids go off to college and they're empty nesters, and it becomes an identity crisis because they're only just parents, or not only, but you know what I'm saying. They've identified with that for so long. So my grandma reinvented herself so many times. And I think at the end of the day, she did share a lot with, because I was a kid that would be like, ask a bunch of questions. Why? How? Huh? But she knew how to handle me. Well, I asked how my grandfather died, and she's like, his heart stopped, which is technically true. But I was like old and adult when I was like, no, he had cancer. But my grandma didn't want to answer the questions like, what's all those things that a kid would ask. She had a good way of putting things in perspective. So that was something I picked up on and I appreciated later, right? Some things hurt really bad, but they're really not a big deal. That's one of my 5 things from my book. To put things in perspective, my grandma would often say, is this going to matter in a year? And that's number 5 on my hit list. But it's like, yeah, getting cut off in traffic makes me really angry in that moment. But I don't even remember last week if I was cut off, and how that affected me.
Right, yeah, you were able to let it go. You didn't deny the feeling of being frustrated or angry or like scared. Like that's what happens to me in the car. If somebody pulls over or goes fast or right by you, you're like, oh God, like the jolt. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I'm alive. Right? You got to be so careful when you're doing that. Oh man. Well, I think that's great that you were able to have time with your grandmother. That's another reason why we were talking a little bit before about, me needing to move and to be closer to my family. It's not common these days for you to have elders living in the household. And so spending time with your grandparents gets less and less and less. And the older you get and the more you take on as an adult, or like you said, if you're a business owner, if you're traveling, doing all these things, you get less and less time with the people that raised you. And so when you actually think about the math, you have what? If you only see them once a year, you see them 15 more times before it's done. It's kind of like, I don't know if I like that. I want to fix that. I want to flip that status number. So I think that's amazing that you actually got an opportunity to be with her. You had a little bit talked about you wanted to go to school and ended up joining the military after the fact. A lot of people actually do the military first and then go to school afterwards. So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about your educational path and how did that lead you into becoming the entrepreneur you are now?
Absolutely, Amanda. I went to a small high school, and I graduated. I think I was third, top of my class, third. And I had a scholarship, but it was tied to a high GPA, which I didn't maintain. And I limped along for a little bit, right? Like I worked full time and went to school full time, and I worked at night, and then I'd go to class all day. So I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't eating right. And I would like fall asleep all the places, like if I sat down for a second. Like change is always painful. In my mind, people join the army, it was go to army, go to jail time, right? I thought, oh my God, what am I getting into? But at the same time, I fell asleep in class and I woke up with a start. And I remember thinking something's got to give. I'm not healthy. And I started looking for all their alternatives. And I turned out in the military, and it wasn't true. Like I had that misconception, go to army, go to jail, which it was entirely full of criminals. And that's one of the things I learned is that people are just people, and people enter the military to achieve exit velocity from their home place, their home situation, or to pay for school like I did. And then it just changes a lot of perceptions that I had about people that wouldn't have had otherwise.
I remember growing up, my dad would get pretty upset about certain TV shows or things like that where Hollywood would always make the Pentagon look like total idiots, or they couldn't figure out, or they would lose all their equipment. And like, granted, I know historically nothing in the American government is exactly as people think it is, but like it would just get so exaggerated. And he'd be like, but they're not. I've met those people. I've worked with those people. They are not this stupid. They're not this mean, or they're not this. The movie Avatar made him so mad. He was like, Marines don't do this. They don't act this way. Yes, they're very proud of who they are and all the work that they do and why they want to represent who they represent in their branch. But he hated that the stereotypes were so negative because there were so many great people that do work there, and smart people and kind people and multicultural people. And There's far more to it than the eye can see, especially on what's marketed sometimes.
Yes, the marketing. And back to that's what you do. And that's, it's a big deal because when I was joining the military, I met the funniest, smartest people, but also the stupidest people. Were they the same people? No. But all of the people are just people. And I'm crazy smart sometimes, but I literally have looked for my phone with the flashlight on my phone. Like, that's not super smart, but whatever,
It happens. It is. Yeah. I get that. I've been reading a bit more about and in your book and things like that, and you ended up getting injured in the military. Is that correct? And so
Yeah.
you switched out early, and that kind of sparked all your ingenuity for, this is what's happening to me, and moved you forward with your biomedical interests and working through all that. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about how that process went, and how did that impact you starting the Buswell Biomedical business?
So, the root of me is I'm a problem solver. And the way that manifested was I became an engineer. I was always going to be an engineer, but I entered in the military, right? I was in the Army in 1997. I only signed up for 3 years, but I had to stay longer to get the medical discharge, which my dad, I never listened to my dad, but that time I did. And he's like, stay in and get the medical discharge. You'll be thankful if there's another war. Dad, there's not going to be another war, said I. And then I get out in 2001.
Right.
And so it's crazy how that happened, but it had so much an effect on my life. I was injured and I was in a UN hospital called the Blue Factory in Bosnia. And I could empathize with my mom 20 years later because, oh my God, I've been there. I didn't have to wait to go to the bathroom. I had a cadre of Norwegian nurses at the UN hospital to take me. But it just wasn't great to be conditioned for 20 years to do something by yourself. And now all of a sudden you have an entourage and it's weird. But my mom had to wait. They were short staffed. She was in Arizona. It was 20 years later and she was in a fancy rehab hospital, but they're short staffed. It's not like any of the people were ill intentioned. There's just not enough of them. I could put myself in my mom's place as well as just dealing with something yourself. When you're 20, you don't really, and I signed up for the military. I thought, oh, this is a thing I had to, deal with. But my mom didn't sign up for anything. She got married and she's very, like, I totally wouldn't care if it's a man or a woman in there. I just cared that there was somebody in there when I went to the bathroom. My mom would definitely care. Like, she would have a triage list, but she would have to wait. They were short staffed and I knew there was a better way, right? Like, I knew this hadn't changed since 1998 in Bosnia, but since then I worked for a lot of great companies. I got a undergraduate in mechanical engineering and a master's in biomedical engineering, and I knew better was possible. Like, for the most of my career, if not all of it, I did research and development, and that meant automating manually intensive tasks to machines doing it. So my first inclination when my mom got injured and I went out there was to burn the place down, which I'm not good at arson anyway, or I have no experience in that. I don't imagine that I'd be very good. But I was also kind of surly and mean to the healthcare workers that were well-intentioned. There's just not enough of them. But it took me a process to realize, oh, it's not just because it's my mom. It's because they're short-staffed and this is a systemic problem. But hearkening back to, I had to redefine myself to join the military, redefine myself when I got out. And knowing that my grandma had done that so drastically, I wasn't afraid of it. Well, I was a little bit afraid, but I wasn't, you know what I mean? It didn't stop me. But I asked myself, if not you, then who? Because I have the experience and I have the education. And if not now, then when? Because it had been 20 years and there's no solution. But it's not like I had the entrepreneurship spirit then. I was like, figured out a solution, which took a year. And then I was just my plan was just to go work for whoever was developing something that was like this. And nobody was. So I patented the device, the UPMO, and built a business around that. And that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've heard a lot from other entrepreneurs that I've interviewed for the show that, like, sometimes if you don't really know what direction to go in, but you want to start your own kind of business or you want to do this thing, you have to look for what is a problem and how can I solve this particular problem for more people. And so one of the best ways to maintain all of that charisma, I guess, or the enthusiasm for whatever it is you're trying to create, you have a personal connection to it. So if you were solving a problem for your mom because you go, oh, I had this issue, I had a different kind of situation happen to me, and now my mom has to go through it, and I don't want her to suffer more than is necessary just to heal. Because you said that she fell.
Yeah, she fell, and then she broke her hips, and she had screws, and she was in rehab for more than 3 weeks and lost. I mean, it doesn't sound like 10 pounds some people could lose, but my mom is a tiny, tiny woman. So she was like 110 pounds or something, and she lost 10 pounds.
Bless her. Not only did you use your prior experience to help your mom, and you guys had a similar situation, so you were able to innovate off of that, but a lot of the times I talk to my guests about their mindsets while they're going through these, transformative moments. We were talking a little bit before the recording that I've broken my leg recently, and so I've been dealing with like the frustration of being immobile and living alone, and I have these 2 pets and I have to take care of myself because I'm still working and interviewing and doing all these things. And it was the first couple of days was really rough mentally. I'm finally in a place where I was feeling good about myself. Like my work was going well, my workouts, my food, everything. Like I felt like I was just on the right kind of path. And then now I can't move. So the most terrifying thing for me still apparently through this process has that feeling of being stuck. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what was your mentality and your mindset when you were going through your injury, and then how did you use that to help your mom?
My biggest thing was I could empathize with my mom in ways that I don't think other people can. I was 20 when I had an injury or 21, and my mom was significantly older, and I knew my mom, but I knew that people don't think about it. Honestly, people just don't think about it until they're in that situation, right? Like you didn't think about what it would be like to walk your dogs when you can't walk, right? So it was a weird situation where I could empathize in a way, and I knew it needed to be allowed, but I also had the knowledge then that it could be allowed, or it could be accomplished without other people. And in fact, other people are not the best. The control system of the upward mobility, which the upward mobility can like fit through a door frame and around the toilet. Like it's huge. But the control system is very personalized, and it's safer. But if you're in a rehabilitation setting and you're in a hospital bed, instead of calling a healthcare worker from a remote, you call this thing and it would come to you like a Roomba. And then you attach your personalized harness that controls it. I was able to know there was a better way and know what was important to get done. I talked to my CMO as a therapist. So her mentality is a common one that I didn't even think about. If you can do something, it's better to do something. But like people who fall generally are scared of falling, so they do less. So then when they step outside their comfort zone, or they're more likely to have a bad fall. And I think that the combination of knowing those things and knowing there's a better way, and the empathy of being a patient and talking to a lot of healthcare workers and what was important to them.
I love that your CMO pointed that out though, that after you have the traumatic experience, insert situation here, for this purposes, it's falling or getting injured physically. The older you get, the less likely you might want to try that again or put yourself in a position where you would have that same issue happen. And yet that fear then makes you less willing to try, and you don't rebuild your strength as easily. You do get injured more because the next time it does happen, you can't lift yourself up. This has been happening with my mom's mother, actually. So another one of the reasons why I needed to leave a couple years ago, she had her hip surgery and then colon cancer and lung cancer. And it's been a lot just getting her into the right proper chairs. And she had physical therapy for a little bit, but her insurance would only cover it for so long. So then she used to be a swimmer. She would swim 3 times a week with her friends. But then after her hip surgery, kind of gave up on that and hasn't gone back out, doesn't want to travel much outside the house very far or for very long either if you do take her out. And so I can see what you're talking about now. That makes a lot of sense, that if you can find a way to help the person who's gone through that particular situation feel confident enough to keep living their life, they will be able to build the strength to prevent the injury from happening again, or at least prevent it from being as severe as before. Your CMO is so smart. I love that. It's exactly right. It goes straight to human psychology, that if I can design something that'll help you get rid of that fear and enable you to live your life independently, you can do all these things that you're missing. I love that.
Erica is really smart, but she looks at things because she's a occupational therapist. So she looks at things with that education and lens. Yeah, it made sense to me when it was mentioned, but it was like not something I thought of. I was totally stuck in doing the activities of daily living independently, good for me mentally, and I needed that escape, but I didn't think about how the benefits of it physiologically, I guess.
Yeah, the fitness industry, luckily, there's some trends that are changing, but a lot of it's moving towards your longevity. Longevity seems to be the cash cow word these days that people are using on social media and stuff, but improving your longevity by lifting your weights, eating well, taking care of your bones, all that kind of stuff, like you'll feel better and look better and you can do more. And if you want to be around to see your grandkids or great grandchildren, like these are the things you can do now to take care of that and prepare for it. And with all the tech and supplements that are available, I would not be surprised if we start pushing the life expectancy years much, much further along.
Yes, and the fact that you live a better life. My mom's was always important to be thin. Well, now she's older and that equals frail. So that definition has changed. And it's like, yeah, people are going to live longer, but they want them to live a quality life while they're living longer, right?
It's been very backwards. Even my grandparents say these things to my brother and I. My brother's was a CrossFit coach and has done powerlifting for a very long time now and was a decathlete in high school and college. So he's been into fitness for a very long time. But she would say these things to us. Oh, don't lift too much, Amanda. You don't want to look too manly, or you don't want to gain too much weight or whatever. In my 30s now, this is so important because I go back and look at myself in college where I thought I was fat. All those Facebook memory photos pop up and oh my God, somebody should have hugged me and been like, please eat this. Please do this thing. Don't do this. This isn't right. My brother's had multiple injuries. He's ripped his chest. He's had his knee worked on. He's, hurt his ankle and stuff before. And that man can deadlift 500 plus pounds. He's crushing it, but it's because he takes care of his body. He can recover and do all those things. So I know my brother will still be doing stuff like that. Maybe not that weight level, but eventually, even into his 80s, he'll still be physically around and doing stuff because he's trying it now.
Whereas when my grandma was 80, standing up out of a wheelchair was a huge deal, right? Like he's going to redefine what old is.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. Tell me, where are you in the process with the UPMO right now? Is it been fully developed and you're using it in different hospitals, or are you still doing the R&D and you're hoping to implement it in the next few years? What is that like while you invent something and then bring it to life?
We have a full-size prototype down in the basement, but it's like just a frame, and we can lift 500 pounds and it can be stable, that kind of thing. But the control system, we know it's doable because I got over 100 samples and there was some commonality across the age spectrum and 50% male and female roughly. And, people stand up and sit down and walk relatively the same. Like walking is a little bit because women have what's called a Q angle from their hips down to their knees and men don't have that. They walk differently, but the stability is very much the same. So we know it's feasible, but it takes a lot of capital to do it, to like integrate everything, and it's an FDA regulated device. So we have to ensure that it's safe and ethical going forward. And that's a good thing. It's just when we talk about the purpose and success, it changes because your ikigai or your reason for living, when it's hard. We're 5 years into it now. The motivation wanes, so there's discipline and that I need to have, and the reason for living doesn't change. But sometimes it's really hard to remember that, right? It was nice when I worked for another company. I had an active 401k and 2 weeks paid vacation, but that's just not the reality now, and that's got to be okay.
Yeah, you've shifted your priorities, so your lifestyle now looks a bit different too. Yeah, while you're trying to make this come to life. Well, let's talk a little bit about all the other projects that you're also working on. The UPMO is being created and it's taking its time. You're doing everything you're supposed to do throughout that process to make it profitable and useful for everyone. In the meantime, you also wrote a book called Is This Seat for Me, which explores imposter syndrome and self-doubt, which is something I think everyone can relate to, depending on how they identify it. And I love that you mentioned in the book that it shows up in different ways for each person. So sometimes some people may not recognize that that's what they're actually feeling, and they can put a name to it by reading your book and go, oh, actually, all right, so I'm not alone in this because this person acts the exact same way as I do. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about your book. When did you decide to write it?
Gladly tell you about this. I started Buswell Biomedical in 2019. I was officially a company, and then to raise money to build stuff, I would pitch my business, right? To I have an education and a background in engineering, not business. So I needed to learn those things. When I would ask questions to further my knowledge, people would be like, oh, it's imposter syndrome. And I didn't know what that meant, but I had a visceral reaction to it. No, it's not. And later I did some investigation and I learned as a person, which I'm capable of doing. But I was like, oh, I I never had a moment where I felt I couldn't learn machine learning or what I needed to learn for business to achieve a company. But I do have imposter syndrome after 20 years of being an engineer and being told no one's going to take you seriously if you quit acting so, air quotes, girly. And I don't like saying girly because we're talking about grown women. But like now, fast forward, I don't feel feminine enough around these women, right? I don't know about childbearing. I have less than one kid. And I don't know about makeup. I don't know about hair. And like an eyelash curler sent me off a deep end. And I was trying to understand how to put all those things because everybody's not everything. There are things you're going to be confident in and present well. And then there's things you have to work on. But that doesn't mean the average person needs to know all your tender spots, right? Like I hated to admit when I didn't know. I didn't want to admit when I didn't know, and I didn't want to ask questions. So people are like, I'll just go to a makeup counter or something and ask questions. And I'm like, I didn't want to advertise my ignorance in that. Like it wasn't something I wanted to admit. So then when I talk to more people, I feel like this is everybody. They don't want to admit. For me, at the time, it was makeup and babies. But like it was also, I got a medical discharge because the generator fell on my foot, right? And I got out of the Army in 2001. So that's part of my story when I pitched my business, but I started realizing when I was recording myself that I would just do weird stuff or I'd speed up. I just didn't like talking about it. And I had to explore that more. And I didn't feel like enough when I was talking about my military service because to really serve, you had to serve in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever to do both, if not one or the other. And I went to whatever. Does that matter? And then I got a medical discharge, not from taking a bullet or jumping on a grenade because a generator fell on my foot. Really not something that people associate with. So I was thinking, well, is my military service enough? And this is years after, I think this was 2 years after the book that I had that revelation, and it sneaks up and attacks you and whispers in your ear, but people don't like to talk about it. So the reason I had included other authors, I thought they had important stories to tell, were different from mine. I have a business accountability partner, and she's like, well, then just ask the other people to contribute stories. That, for instance, Kate Mansker in the book talks about she didn't really have she didn't have imposter syndrome until she was trying to get breast milk through TSA. And then all of a sudden she realized that she was different from her coworkers. She's also an engineer. My coworkers as an engineer were always male. So it's not like they're ill-intentioned. That's just not their life experience. But she could speak to that. I never could. So Peter provides a story, and he's a male nurse. And he talks about how like people would make assumptions based off of how he looked. And people would assume he's a doctor. So he felt like he had to know more and exhibit more. And I have gone to the emergency room with elderly people, or just people in general, and had them assume the female doctor's the nurse and the male nurse is the doctor. That happens all the time. And it used to bug me, but I never empathized or thought about what the male nurse thought of that. So I thought that was an important component to add, that like this dimension of like, it looks different in different people's lives, but it doesn't mean it's different. Like that feeling of not being enough, like that you're the only one that feels this way. It's ridiculous.
The way that I've noticed with this podcast is that through storytelling and by sharing your experiences, you can connect better. And by improving your human connection in general, not just practicing communication skills, but just having that intimate connection where you can relate to each other on some kind of level, it kind of levels the playing field a little bit where you go, oh, I don't have to be intimidated by this situation because they've gone through this too, or they feel the exact same way. And so I don't have to feel awkward or less than about this because I can, kind of let that roll off. But I really liked what you were talking about, the constructs of femininity for you too, because being a woman by originally going to school for your engineering, and then, which is a male dominated field still. My mom was a computer engineer in the 80s. And so when she graduated college and went to IBM, she was one of the very first coders that they had ever hired that was female. And so she has a lot of very similar experiences to what you're kind of talking about, where you're walking in the room and it's just men and trying to explain to them female concerns, or a wife's concerns, or a breastfeeding mom's concerns, and things that, unless those men are married with wives that are going through those things, they might kind of understand a little bit better, but they'll pretty much never fully get it or even consider that as a situation to begin with. Did you ever ask yourself the question, am I doing this for me, or who am I doing it for? Like, why do I have to care about being so feminine or not feminine enough or whatever? Like, who does this matter for? Who am I worried about judging me? Because that's kind of where I've been able to flip it for me. If I start to realize that I'm going down that path, or I'm feeling like an imposter in a situation, am I trying to impress myself with this situation, or am I trying to impress other people? Or
I think when it wasn't like a conscious decision, right? Like when I got my first engineering gig, my first engineering job, I was like worried about my student loan debt. I wanted to fit in with the other engineers. It wasn't like I didn't have a abacus where I was like, oh, this person, I was one of the few women, right? But I didn't have abacus beads like this person, whatever, have this idea of like what I wanted to change the idea that you can't like sparkly magic unicorns and know about engines and artificial intelligence and all those things. Like, it's just weird when you look to the left and right of you and everybody, or not, those people are different, right? Like, I entered a role that I didn't look like the previous people who had that role, right? Traditionally, engineers look like this and I look like me, but that doesn't mean that I couldn't do the job. And that goes into my book. Like, there's 5 personal solutions, but one is just remembering your past experiences. And as an engineer, that was like, well, no, never does it enter what somebody looks like. When I really thought about it, it was like, okay, I was a mechanic in the military. I got good grades, but I had to convince myself. Now, makeup, as I got older, I was like, I just never valued that pursuit. And I didn't realize those were things you needed to know. But mascara, specifically the eyelash curler, like totally flipped me out. But I had to start building from somewhere. Well, I learned how to build a concrete countertop on YouTube. I can learn how to apply makeup or to pick out makeup or whatever on YouTube. And that's what I did. And I started building confidence that way. But it's not like I had a method that overreaches just my pursuit of engineering. It was like, okay, I'm going to approach this, and what's logical and what other people look like shouldn't matter. And so I'm not going to let it matter. But you assume people judge and what they think of you, that really doesn't matter. What you think yourself. Prove it to yourself that you belong where you are. I've heard this thing that like a ship is totally safe in the harbor, but that's not what it's designed for. And I think as human beings, we need to take risks and be out sailing around, like doing our thing.
I love that you took integrating what it means to be feminine or a woman in these particular pursuits, but you did it at your own pace, right? Because you went into the original situations being like, this is who I am, this is what I'm trying to do, this is the goal I'm trying to achieve. You didn't go in there thinking ahead of time, okay, I'm supposed to look a certain way to convince them to do this thing, and so I need to be, as the word you hate, girly as possible to make them, to disarm them essentially at first. And it's a weird line to toe, right? Between, I want to feel good about myself, but I'm also here to get the job done. I'm not here to make you feel better about whether or not I'm woman enough. Like, that's not the point of today's meeting. Like, it's about helping other people that need us and need this technology. So I'm glad to hear that you found a way. I'm sure when you were younger, it's really hard to not let that hurt your self-confidence if somebody were to call you like not woman enough, or too much of the other, one or the other. But I love to hear that you found a way to twist that self-doubt into, okay, well, if I don't know something, what did I do when I didn't know before? How do I do that in this scenario? And then you did it and you built it up, and that helped reduce that, imposter situation.
And having that confidence. And I think that that's everything should be approached like that. Like, I don't know yet. It's a very empowering thing. Like, my brain has this ability to absorb or answer the challenges that it's faced with. Just give it a chance.
I like that. Well, for anybody who's listening now who may be struggling with self-doubt and they could probably pull some good lessons from your book, what would you say is one lesson from your book that they absolutely need to know?
I think the most important thing is you're not alone. Like it looks different. Than might call it a monster under the bed, like sneaks out and whispers in your ear. But everybody has a monster under their bed, and you're not alone in dealing with that. Just getting the tools in your toolkit to fight that monster or to not let it control your life. It's always going to be with you. It might change, it might evolve, but to know that other people have that monster too, and it's not just you.
No, that's good. That's a really good one. And community is very important to this show, and finding a safe place for people who feel lost to connect is so important. So I'm glad that you have that in the book. We've also talked a bit on this show about, reinvention when you're going through a traumatic experience or a life change that you weren't really expecting, and you have to come out the other side and you're reinventing yourself. And you've had to do that as well, going from the army to being an engineer and an innovator and now an author. I'm curious, what is something that you had to unlearn in order to move forward?
I think those changed in every you're presented with new challenges and new learnings at every situation. Like when I entered the military, I had to unlearn that people join the army, or go to jail. Like it was just going to be a bunch of miscreants or whatever that was in the military. And now I struggle with, well, when I was an engineer, it was changing what it meant to me to be an engineer. Like it was a problem solver, not somebody who was not girly. Like that's ridiculous. But it changes all the time. Like, and that perception's real. Like venture capital funding, and I think this is a 2022 number, is women get 2% of that. 98% goes to males. And it's like, I'm sure there's a lot of ways to peel an onion, but it's important that people know what you're about and what you're coming from, but also that the societal change, like the society needs to acknowledge that women are 50% of the population and not all good ideas come with a Y chromosome.
Yeah, you're missing out on all the other potential opportunities that could be there if you're only giving 2% of the venture capital to women. That's
Yeah.
actually, I'm surprised by that, but I'm surprised that it's still that low.
Yeah, that's a 2022 number. That's a 1972 number, you'd think, right?
Well, yeah, it makes me curious if is that because there aren't enough women pitching to these groups, or they genuinely there's just a bias already in place and therefore they pick males. So I would, me being way curious, I'd like rabbit hole right down there and be like, all right, what's going on? Is it marketing? Is it the presentation skills? Is it the way we pitch the business? Is it getting in front of the correct venture capitalist group? Like, do we just go to the wrong one where they're only investing in these types of businesses instead? That's fascinating.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Okay. I was one of those people who were probably pitching to the wrong people, but it was like dating. I was like pitching to somebody while they ate. I was pitching, like, I went to pitch to this venture capitalist and his belly was hanging out of his shirt. He's a billionaire. He could buy a shirt that fit, but he just didn't care. He didn't respect himself. He didn't respect me. And that number is very interesting. And it's like everything, it's multifaceted. So I found that when I get in this pity party portion of myself as a business leader, talking about how like you need to have discipline for when your ikigai doesn't give you the motivation that you need. But I also was like trying to validate, but then I found like women venture capitalists or women venture groups fund men at a higher rate than women.
Oh, so the
But
bias is internal too.
well, I don't, so it's so different because there are fewer women who start companies. But even of the women, that 2%, if it's divvied up, the vast majority of that goes to white women. Once you're a minority woman, you get even more screwed. You even get less. Now, is that because there's less of those people? Partly. Is it less because they're less likely to take a chance? And historically, I keep bringing this up, but historically, they don't look like the business owners of yesterday. So it's multifaceted, and it's important in that point to be like, believe in yourself, to know what you're about, be firmly rooted in what you can and can't do.
Mm, wow. Yeah. I feel like you could probably do like 2 or 3 more podcast episodes just on that particular aspect alone for women and leadership and entrepreneurship and stuff, diving down that rabbit hole for investment pursuits and how to handle that as a founder. I'm sure you have a lot of pressure and the psychology behind like you're carrying this on your back, right? Like, and eventually you launch the product and people are going to be relying on you, and that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself while you're in this process right now. Well, I usually have like the 5 core questions that I ask every guest for the show. What do you want out of life, and have you found what you're looking for?
This evolves like everything else. When I was getting out with my bachelor's degree, getting out of school, I had this idea of what success meant, and that has evolved over time. And now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I just want the upward mobility to be available when I need it. And that will be success for me. If I can go to the bathroom safely and independently when I need it, then that's success. That idea totally changes. Ask me again tomorrow and in 5 years.
Yeah, me. I know my terms of success are also changing too. Like when I can go to the bathroom without having to use crutches, that would be great. Or take a shower without having to wrap my foot in plastic. That'd be nice. Oh, but yeah, there's like long-term success and like short-term daily success that I can count. So I love that because everybody defines it a little bit differently too. So I always like asking those kinds of questions. What would you say has been your greatest achievement?
So my greatest achievement, I know, it harkens back to just not being afraid of the challenges that are presented. When I entered basic training, I wasn't afraid. I entered into the military, I wasn't afraid, but it was just something I had to get through or whatever. I had that mentality, but I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid to leave. I wasn't afraid to go back to school. I wasn't afraid. And I think that that's a big achievement, to just accept what comes and use that to build my empire. People talk about, don't worry about if people throw stones at you, use those stones to build your castle or whatever. And I don't know that I've done that successfully, but I think it's important to acknowledge that that's, what I have done. I took a generator falling on my foot and figured out, I could empathize with other people in this situation, but instead of being like, whoa, woe is those poor people, I figured out a way to solve that problem. And that's, I think, successful and a great achievement.
You took what could have been a very traumatic and upsetting situation, and instead of like falling down the rabbit hole or getting, addicted to painkillers or something to deal with your life, after that you recovered and said, never again. Like, we're going to find a way to help other people not have to deal with this. And I think that that's great that you were able to flip it and use that experience from your life to propel your future forward in ways that you probably never would have realized at 21. So tell me, how do you define purpose, and what does living in your purpose look like to you?
Purpose is very similar to success. In fact, they could swap that out. But I think my idea for purpose has changed. I cross-trained as a generator mechanic because they were busy. I was a chemical equipment repairer in 1998. You weren't, or the late 90s, you weren't busy as that. You were busy all the time as a generator mechanic, but if you weren't busy, the Army would make you busy. Using that was details, and details meant cleaning toilets. And there's purpose in that, but I didn't see the purpose in it. I just thought, gross. So that's a personal thing too. And I think what I find purpose in day to day is not the same as what you or, oh my gosh, my dog that just moved closer to me, she thinks her purpose is to hunt rabbits and chase things in her sleep and do dog stuff. Her purpose for her living and my purpose for her are very different. Like, she makes me smile. My dog, Penny, is, just doing dog stuff. And I think that purpose for me has changed. Ultimately, my purpose is to create this independence and safety for people in rehabilitation hospitals. And that is a big picture, but some days that looks like I got to take out the trash because I'm the CEO, but I'm also the janitor, And so that changes from day to day, and how I propel that mission forward, drawing that line to any job I do is important.
Oh, and that's good. And I'm glad you pointed out that while you're in the pursuit of this project and this purpose, you're not just only doing the thing that you like, you're doing the things that are also not so glamorous, not so fun, not so shiny. Because being a CEO or a founder of a business, not every day is amazing. And as a founder, you have tough decisions and things you have to do. And taking out the metaphorical trash every now and then, it's something you're a part of. And being able to take responsibility for all aspects of the company, I think and all aspects of the project, not just the fun stuff that you would rather do. I think that that's really important too. If you could give yourself advice 10 years ago, what would that advice be?
to listen to my intuition or my gut more than other people, or as much as. So many times in my life, I minimized what I was thinking or feeling was or knowing was right and listening to other people. Not that they're ill intentioned, but other people, just like in my book, I talk about don't compare yourself to others. They're not living your life. You don't know what their experience is telling them, but your gut is speaking or your intuition totally for you. They know your intuition knows your journey, knows where you're at, knows what you need, and listen to that more.
Yeah. And I've talked to a few people about intuition and stuff as well on the show. I'm curious, how did you start to connect to it? Did you always have a pretty intuitive mind and you would listen to that inner voice or that inner knowing, or did you connect to it later in life and you developed it over time, kind of a thing?
I think this is going to date me a little bit, but like Pong, if it's from doing things wrong and being like, oh, I knew better, but I didn't. I listened to this person instead of what I knew was right. And I think that happened enough where I learned that lesson to listen to it more, to put more value in my own intuition. You see, other people, again, I'm going to say this, they're not bad, they're not ill intentioned, right? But they don't know. Like, for instance, I worked at Anheuser-Busch and I left there just because I say very similar to your situation, actually. I was traveling all the time. I had learned what I came there to learn, and I took a pay cut to leave. But that was my intuition, and everybody told me, don't do that. But then 6 months later, Anheuser-Busch sold to InBev, and they laid off all the engineers. They went from like 400 corporate engineers in St. Louis to 12.
Mm.
But I had already jumped ship, and I listened to myself then. It wasn't that I was the wise thing to do or that I had any reason to think that was going to happen, but I knew that that wasn't for me. And I didn't try to pretend that I'm going to be happy doing this for 30 years.
Yeah, I have that kind of freaky flashback feeling a lot too, where I left in 2022 from the FBI, and then everything changes in 2024 after the elections, and now the last 3 months, some of my friends have been absolutely terrified, just very worried about where they're going to be able to go or what they're going to be able to do or work on or how they're even able to act at the office anymore. And I can't even imagine the stress. But based on the career that I had while I was there, if I had stayed, and I would be in the exact same position, if not more so in a threatened position based on the cases that I worked and things like that. So it was divine timing, I guess. But I also kind of had that same intuitive feeling in my voice that was just like, this is not it for you anymore. This is not the way, and you can leave. It'll be okay. You can leave. And yeah, so I get that. I can relate to that, knowing where you're like, wow, I can't believe I missed that mark just barely. Like it could have been me. It could have been me.
Yep.
And that's freaky, but I'm so glad that you learned how to lean into that and listen to it, because it's hard. Women are more often to ask other people for advice before making their own decisions, and you're taught to do that, right? Because societally you want to be amenable to everyone, and if you didn't ask a certain person's opinion and they found out that you did it, and then they're like offended, like, you didn't ask me, how could you make this decision without me? And it's like, but it wasn't you, it wasn't your life, it's my life.
Yep.
But learning to have the strength to say, I know what's best for me, and I need to lean into that. And that's such a hard skill to cultivate if you're not taught how to, or how to listen to it, or what does it sound like. So I think that's great that you hark on that and lean into that now. And then our final question: what advice would you give someone who is listening to this episode, who might be feeling stuck or lost in their life right now, and they're searching for meaning and purpose? What advice would you give to them?
This is a hard question, but I think it's important to just know that other people are doing that too. And again, I'm going to talk about intuition, but like, what's going to fit. I like supermodels in their outfits. That's great. But that doesn't mean I know, because I'm this age, that it's not going to fit my physique, right? Like, oh my gosh. Things, especially in the late 90s, weren't built for women with curves. And I think it's important to realize that what's for you might not be for everybody. And you're not the only one feeling that and having that flailing moment.
Yeah, and you can lean into that flail because something always comes out of it. It's kind of what I've been thinking about a lot lately, that like that worst, darkest moment is actually the crux of a turning point where you're about to level up in a different way. And in order to break through whatever that particular ceiling might be, every time you do that, it gets a little bit harder and a little bit harder, but you've survived all the other levels. You can survive this level too. Well, Sheila, this has been so much fun. I've had such a great time chatting with you. Please let all the listeners know what's the best way to reach out to you or find you if they want to engage or talk about the business or find your book.
The book is called Is This Seat for Me? And I have the website, www.isthisseatforme.com. If a person goes to that website and leaves their email, you get a chapter of my book via audio or ebook. You can choose. You just can't choose the dead tree version, this version. But I think we'll start an email conversation and I won't spam you. But that's the best way to reach me.
Great. Okay. Well, everyone, I will make sure to put Sheila's information in the show notes. And remember, like, subscribe, leave a review. Let us know what you loved about this episode. Any feedback you have for me or Sheila, we would greatly appreciate it. And we welcome your questions. And I'll be sure to respond to as many of the DMs as I can. You can find us on Apple and Spotify and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to follow along and subscribe. That's the best way for us to stay in contact. You can always find me at hello@podcastforthelost.com. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well. And remember, wanderers are always welcome.